And welcome everybody. I guess this is the main session where all the groups are present. What we are going to do in this session, let me just briefly outline. So, I will take a few minutes to talk about the communication we have had with Kendriya Vidyalaya Sangathan authorities about you know the extension of the course by one more week, and teachers should be able to make use of IT infrastructure in their school. So that permission has been obtained, approval is there. Then I will actually go over, I will introduce you to, uh, a sort of self-paced uh, course or self-paced learning experience, I would say, which I think all of you should go through. I mean, we have also gone through that. This has been prepared by our colleagues in the educational technology department at IIT Bombay, and I mean, it's highly recommended. I'm going to go through specific topics of this today, and after that uh, we will be going over the assignment that was given to groups 1 and 2, and we'll be talking a little bit about the principles involved in setting such assignments, and finally we will have a think group share activity on creating programming assignments on your own. Okay, so first things first. So we have over the last week. So this is primarily meant for all the teachers from Kendriya Vidyalayas. Over the last week, we contacted KVS authorities. We had a discussion with them. We told them of the situation with respect to our current workshop. That because there are three kinds of participants, we'll need to include additional modules and all of that. So we currently have a formal approval letter, which we will actually, some of you may have already received it from your principals or from your KVS authorities, but we are also making it available on IIT Bombay X platform, and you should be able to download it from there and show it to your school principal, and everything has been approved. So extension of the workshop for an additional week, including live sessions next weekend, and for those teachers who have problems accessing IT resources at home, you can go to your school and access the school IT resources if you so want. But if you're comfortable doing this from your home, then that's fine. That's also
Yes, sir. Your letter has been received.
okay. Great.
Hmm.
So I think that takes care of a concern that several of you had about what do we do about this extension and how do we access the resources. So I think that's taken care of. The next thing, which is kind of the main core thing that I want to go over right now, is to try to sort of introduce you to some of the principles. In fact, this is applicable. Of course, we are going to do this with specific focus on teaching programming, but all teachers, those who teach programming, those who do not teach programming, this is applicable to them as well. The specific examples, the specific focus topics that I'm going to talk about are, will be with respect to programming, but I think this you should find use of in whatever subject you're trying to teach online. So for that purpose, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to take you to a very, very, excellently prepared self-paced material that our colleagues in the Education Technology Department have prepared. And of course, this material is freely available. So, you must, of course, go through it because you're a participant in this workshop. You can feel free to share it with your colleagues in your schools, colleges, wherever you are. And I think the more and more teachers become aware of these techniques, use these techniques, follow them in the right way, I think online and blended teaching is going to become more and more effective. Okay, so I'm now going to share my screen. So you can see the website for this. This is, we will of course make this web link available, but you can also note it down. So it is sites.google.com/view/IITB Teach Online. and this is freely available. I mean, this has been prepared by the Educational Technology Department at IIT Bombay, uh, and this is available for everybody. So what I will do today is I will actually walk you through some of the things that are present here in the specific context of teaching programming, and we will do this for roughly half an hour until around 4:15, and after that, I mean, clearly this is not going to be. I mean, you are required to go and see this material, see the videos, see the slides. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk you over these things, and then it will be expected that you go and see these further in detail. And then we are going to go and discuss the programming assignments. Okay. So now that all of you have access to the site, I mean, you can open it on your computers if you have one right now. Uh, I just want to sort of uh, highlight a few things that are there here. There are very nice recorded talks, slides, everything. But let me click on the challenge, and I mean, basically, I would like to highlight this statement over here, which is it holds regardless of what subject you're teaching. Uh, the point is, because of the pandemic and all of that, we were forced to use the online medium, but of course the power of the online medium was always there, and the question now is that how do I exploit the power of this online medium and promote effective student learning, not only when during the pandemic we are forced to do this, but even beyond the pandemic, when face-to-face classes resume, I think the online medium can be effectively used to improve the teaching learning experience. Okay. So first, some basics, and I'm sure all of you are more or less familiar with this, but just so that all of us are on the same page, I will walk you through this. And I guess one of the main things to think about here, actually, I think it's written here as well. So this says that the course will attempt to maintain low floor, which means low entry barrier for getting started. This is important because it means that we are assuming very few prerequisites for you to be able to get started with these, what is taught in this self-paced course. It has a high ceiling, which means that you can use the material here uh, to do some very simple online blended teaching, all the way up to learner-centric MOOCs. This is the massively open online classrooms, and with wide walls, which means that there are multiple options for achieving a goal. It's not just one option. Okay. And as I said, that one of the main things that we need to deal with is whether we should have synchronous teaching or asynchronous teaching. What do we mean by synchronous teaching? That students and teachers, they come together on a platform at the same time, and they interact in real time. And this appears like a close replacement of what we do in a normal classroom. It turns out that there are both advantages and disadvantages of this. Advantages are, of course, the personal engagement. The disadvantage is that not all students may be able to access this. This requires bandwidth, scheduling, more, very, very importantly, because your online session is going to be probably a long lecture of 40 minutes or 45 minutes or 1 hour, there will inevitably be student fatigue, and there will be instructor fatigue also, because you're speaking in front of a camera. So there are pluses and minuses. And similarly, the asynchronous mode, which is that the instructors prepare and post the course materials in advance, and then the students, at their own convenience, within a specified deadline, you just like what we are trying to do for this course, we are giving things for you to go through within a particular time, so that we can come back and then proceed from there. So that's kind of the asynchronous way. So an example is a set of pre-recorded videos and corresponding practice questions. Okay. So the advantage of this is that anytime, anywhere access, self-paced, flexible, Students may interact with the material repeatedly and over a much longer duration. The disadvantage is that you don't get the feeling of a real class. There is no immediate response. There is no real-time interaction going on. And so really the right thing, and that is what this entire pedagogy workshop is about, is to actually blend these things together. You know, even when you have, you know, face-to-face classes become possible at some time, hopefully in the near future, I think it is an excellent idea if you can blend these things together, because each of these synchronous and asynchronous ways of imparting you know, knowledge actually has its advantages, and so why not get the best of both worlds? And particularly in the online mode, you know, we can have our online course where the material is prepared, given in advance. Students go through that at their own pace, and then we also have a live question answer session, right, or live interaction session, somewhat similar to what we're trying to do in this course. Okay. Now, so are there any questions about this? Are these terminologies okay? I mean, synchronous, asynchronous. I hope everybody is familiar with this. That, I mean, if anybody has any question, maybe you can raise your hand and I can see. Yeah.
No, my question is, WhatsApp is synchronous or asynchronous?
WhatsApp, if you're posting material on WhatsApp, which is to be seen later and some work is to be done based on that, then it is asynchronous. But if you're having a video conversation, a video session over WhatsApp,
Yes.
then it's synchronous. But I do not think WhatsApp allows you to have video conversations with very large number of participants.
Yes,
I
sir.
think there are restrictions, right? So WhatsApp, from what I understand, is a lot of teachers are using WhatsApp basically to post material that is asynchronous.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Material, students can see it at their own time, right? I mean, just think about the key features of asynchronous. Why do we call it asynchronous? Because not everybody is required to be present at the same time, right? So you can
Okay,
post
sir.
something in
Thank you.
WhatsApp. Student 1 may look at it at 9 a.m. Student 2 may look at it at 11 a.m. Student 3 may look at it in the evening, whatever. Whereas synchronous is something like what we are doing right now. I mean, if you miss this session between 3:30 to 5:30, then you have missed it, right? You can only go and see a recording of it, or you can go and see a summary of it, but you have missed this session, correct?
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so if that is fine, we'll go ahead to the next most important thing, which is, you know, basically the trade-offs and what blend should we use. Okay. And I think, you know, this statement here. So once again, you know, we are trying to adopt this same style in this workshop itself. So you are required to go and see the videos for programming that we have put up. We are now saying that please go and see some of the videos for online teaching also, so that when we come and meet, you know, in this live interaction, we can have a more fruitful discussion. We know that everybody has seen these things and we are going ahead beyond what we have seen in the videos, or we are discussing things that we have seen in the video. We are not trying to catch up with what was there in the video and we didn't get time. So it is very important that, you know, that we blend these two things together, and we also put in the required amount of time, required amount of effort for, you know, both our participation in the asynchronous mode and participation in the synchronous mode. So I think this statement here is very important, that while we may be tempted to replicate our face-to-face classroom into the online medium using some tool, this is not advised. So I think as teachers who are perhaps new to this online medium of instruction, this is something that one has to accept and sort of move ahead with that, that the purpose of or using the online medium is not to replicate the face-to-face classroom. As I said, using the online medium can actually give you benefits beyond the face-to-face classroom. So we should not be trying to replicate the face-to-face classroom, but we should try to make the best use of the online medium to impart the best teaching learning experience. Okay. And as it is stated here, that it is usually not an either or decision, either synchronous or asynchronous. It is recommended to have a mix of both modes, and a single course or even a single topic can have a combination of the modes. Okay. Now, so let me directly jump into this. So we are not going to play these videos over here. You can see them on your own, but this is kind of trying to say what happens. So when you see this segment of a video, what you'll see is that, because of the length of the segment, I mean, it's not very long, but because of the length of the segment, you will notice that beyond a particular point your attention starts flagging. And this we have been trying to sort of repeatedly emphasize, that if you make long videos, then students are very unlikely to watch the entire long video. Okay. Whereas if you break it up into shorter segments, uh, perhaps have each segment focused on a subtopic, and then we are also going to talk about how you can make these videos more interesting, then it is far better. Okay, then it is far better for maintaining the student's attention, for keeping the student engaged. Okay, so in the interest of time, we are not going to play these videos right now, but let us see if towards the end we can, but you can go and play these on your own. Okay. Now, so the recommendations based on fairly detailed studies and research is that to have a blend of synchronous and asynchronous approaches, and here is the recommended mix, that 1 hour of live interaction along with 2 hours equivalent of posted material, uh, roughly corresponding to a 3-hour per week class. Okay, this is, for example, what we have at IIT Bombay. Each course is typically 3 hours a week. And while we teach them face to face, we have these 3 hours of face to face classes. But when we are switching online, we say, okay, because we are using a different medium, we are going to have 2 hours equivalent of posted material and 1 hour of live interaction per week. And of course, when we are having this live interaction, there are issues of students' access to internet. These are also sort of highlighted here. Students' access to smart devices, all of that. So one has to make sure that whatever happens in these live classes is summarized, is made available also to students, as we talked in one of the earlier sessions, that just making the raw recording available is usually not good. Summary of it is much better. Okay. And of course, just like any other skilled profession, there is no unique bullet for saying that this is the best way of doing online teaching. There are only best practices, and we have to become familiar with the best practices, but then we also have to adapt the strategies depending on the specific context. Okay, so the takeaway from here is, do not try to replicate your face-to-face classrooms. That is the wrong objective to set off to achieve. And the second thing is, use a blend of this synchronous and asynchronous things. Just synchronous is not good. Just completely asynchronous also may not be good. A blend is usually the right way. And as you see here among the recommendation things, there is more of the asynchronous thing so that students can go at it at their own pace. But there is some amount of synchronous interaction as well that's happening, so that the feeling of interaction, the feeling of conversation as happens in a real classroom is also there. Okay. Now we'll move on to the next thing, which is the terminology. As I said, this is a very quick walkthrough. This is certainly not meant to substitute your going through this course material. It's excellently prepared material, very nicely organized. Please go through it. This is all part of our responsibility, I would say, as we transition to online mode, or as we even try to use online even along with their face-to-face classroom. Now here are some terminology, and while as you go through it on your own, I would recommend that you go and look at all of this terminology, so it's easier for you to understand the rest of the material in this course. But I would like to highlight a few things. So one is what we call a learning dialogue. Okay, and note that we are calling this a learning dialogue as opposed to just pre-recorded video, right? So what is a learning dialogue? As we've already said, that long lecture videos are not effective for student engagement. So what we're going to do is, or what is recommended is that we have short videos followed by what are called these reflection spots, right? So maybe you have a 10-minute or an 8-minute video explaining something, and then after that you actually pose a question, you ask the student to do an activity, and maybe that activity could even, you could even assign a little bit of weightage to it, so that students actually do that activity, right? So in video activities, quizzes, uh, so as the student is seeing the material, they see some part of the material, then they have to, you know, think and reflect and maybe engage in some activity, and then they see some other material and then again engage in some activity. So you see, it is more like a dialogue. You know, there is some part of it where you are providing the content to the student, there is another part of it where the student is reflecting and giving inputs back to you. I mean, all of this is happening in an asynchronous mode, because, you know, the student can send these back to you as part of some discussion forum, as part of an exercise that you can assign a little bit of marks to. But the point is that these have to be interspersed, because otherwise it becomes one long video, and that doesn't work. And I want to illustrate this, or I want to talk specifically about this with respect to programming, when you're teaching programming. Okay. So last time, I guess there was somebody who requested that I show how command line arguments are read in Python. So what I want to do is I want to show that, and, you know, of course I don't have a pre-recorded video for that, but what you're going to be seeing, think of it as coming from a pre-recorded video, and then I would want to add a reflection spot, and I would expect you to tell me back something, and then I want to go back and continue and proceed with that further. Okay. So we will cover all of this terminology, but, you know, I want to illustrate this learning dialogue first by taking that example of how to read command line arguments. Okay. So towards that end, what I will do is maybe the first thing that I want to do. So let me share. Okay. So let me split this. So think of this. Think of this as a pre-recorded video coming to you. I mean, I could have recorded it, but I just want to tell you how you can possibly prepare a learning dialogue. Okay. So what we are going to do is we are going to try to understand how command line arguments are. Is the font large enough? Can everybody see the font, or should I increase?
Yes, it's visible.
Yes. It's all right, sir. You can be able to read.
Okay, thank you. So reading command line arguments, and, you know, since the specific request was, I mean, we can do this in C, C++, whatever. Since the specific argument was about, since the specific request was for Python, we will use Python to demonstrate this. Okay. So the first thing that I want to ask, or the first thing that I want to mention, and then of course I'm going to ask, is that why would one need command line arguments in a program? And I guess even before that, what do we mean by a command line argument? Okay. So what do we mean by a command line argument is that I might want to write a program. So let us say, just for the sake of example, I want to write a program, that my program, and when I run this program, I want it to take two numbers and add them up and return me the sum of these two numbers. Now, of course, I could write this program such that when I run this program, the program prompts me to say, give the first number, and then I give the first number, then it prompts me, give the second number, and I give the second number, and then it adds them up and gives me the result. But I could also write a program which takes these two numbers directly from the command line. So for example, if I say my program and 12 and 29, and then I just run the program, then it adds 12 and 29, picking them up from the command line, and just prints me the result. Okay. Now one might say that, well, this looks like a very artificial program. You know, why would I want to do this? Why would I want to? Why should I not just read the numbers from within the program? Why should I not prompt the user to read the numbers from within the program? So yes, I mean, this sounds like an artificial example, but the principle is the same. And a more realistic example might be, let us say that you have a program which takes maybe two files, file 1 and file 2, and then it concatenates these two files. It attaches one file after the third file, after the second file, and prints this concatenated file into file 3. Okay, so this is perhaps not such such a contrived example, because I mean, we do have such programs which do this. Every time you try to compile a program, you provide as part of the command line argument the name of the file that contains the program that you want to compile. Every time you try to do a lot of other file operations, you actually provide the names of the files as part of the command line argument. So what we what we mean by command line argument is that along with the command for running the program, in that same line, I'm going to provide a few arguments that the program should take in, and then it could be as simple as adding two numbers. It could be as complicated as taking a bunch of files, doing some complicated processing within them, and then generating some output. This is a very standard way of writing programs where we allow some command line arguments to be passed. Now, most programming languages, certainly advanced programming languages, will allow you this feature to read things from the command line, to read arguments from the command line. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of illustrate this on using Python. So let me just start writing something. Okay, maybe I will create another window over here, and I'll say test.py. And so I would, I'm going to use some very minimal features of Python. So so maybe I want to write a program which takes in. Okay, so I want to write a program that takes in 3 command line arguments, and the first should be an integer or a number between 0 and 9. The second is either yes or no. I mean, you can have command line arguments for all kinds of things. It's either yes or no. And the third is perhaps a file name. Okay, so I want to write a program that takes in these 3 command line arguments. And of course, if you run the program without these command line arguments, it also reports an error if you don't give these command line arguments. Right. So the basic structure of a program to do this would be what? I mean, I'm going to draw a little skeleton, and then I'm going to have this dialogue where I expect some of you to sort of tell me how the basic structure should look like. So I guess, the basic structure could look like this, that somehow figure out, somehow find out. So, I mean, we don't know how to find out yet, but find out how many command line arguments were given. Okay. And if this is not the right number, here in this case it is 3, then print an error message. Okay. Now, otherwise, what you do is you check whether the first command line argument, let's say CLA, is a number between 0 and 9. Okay. If so, fine. Otherwise, print an error. Right. Then you do a similar thing. Check whether the second CLA is either yes or no. Sorry. And similarly, if so, fine. Otherwise, print an error message. Right. And finally, I can just say that print the file name given as the third argument. Okay. So let us say this is the basic skeleton of my program that I want to write. Okay. I could write this in C++, I could write this in Python, I could write it in any other language. Now, what I would like you to reflect on and tell us, raise your hand or type it into the chat window and tell us that which of these three, sort of are fairly straightforward things which can be done using normal conditional statements that we have done earlier, and which of this thing really requires you to know maybe a little bit more than what you learned earlier, right? So there are these various statements, finding out how many command line arguments were given. If this is not 3, print an error message. Otherwise, you do something. So I would now like to request participants to raise hand and or type it into the chat window and say which of these statements you think goes beyond the simple, assignment statements, conditional statements that we have learned so far. Yes. Okay, so this is the peril of a long lecture. I guess I started at 3:30. It is 4:10. It's all I've been speaking for 40 minutes, and I perhaps have lost the attention of several of you. So I want to get back your attention. So I mean, it's okay if you say something which is not fully correct, but I would like to hear back from you.
Just to give a little more time for our friends to think, let me interject by re-emphasizing what Professor Supratik mentioned, namely recording a 1 hour long lecture or even a longer, slightly shorter but long lecture is a absolute no-no, because there is a global statistics that videos sessions of longer than 8 minutes are not fully watched by 98% of the people. And this statistics has been collected over lakhs and lakhs of people doing multiple courses. So please appreciate what Professor Supratik is emphasizing. And in that context, the material that is available on the ET website, which he has shown the glimpses of, should be very, very carefully seen, because they embody the essence of what we have learned about pedagogy of online and mixed mode teaching. The second thing I would like to mention is, very recently, in fact yesterday, an article in Marathi which I had written appeared in Maharashtra Times talking about the mixed mode usage for future education. I had written it in Marathi. I will post it on the course page, and I will also try to post the Google translation without any adulteration for those who don't understand Marathi. I wanted to say two things. Number one, that article re-emphasizes the points which are being made in this pedagogy workshop. And number two, the technology has advanced so much that Google Translate is able to more or less capture not just the translation of individual sentences, but of paragraphs, because I have translated paragraph by paragraph. So I'll do that later within a day or so. In the meanwhile, let us get back our attention to the question that Professor Supratik has raised. I hope by now some people would have raised hand.
Yes.
Supratik,
So
you see that? Yes.
Bharati and Manoj Kumar Malviya. So maybe you can unmute yourselves and.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. So the first thing that we have to do here is that we have to check the number of arguments that are passed using command line. So for this, we require one file, or you can say library, that is your sys library in Python. SYS, the system, that's info system. So with the help of which it has one property, that is ARGB. That is an SYS is a one library that keeps track of all the command line arguments and their count also. By default, or how it is designed using the one argument, one property, or you can say one variable in it, that is argv, that is argument vector. And here the first, it is we can think of it's like an array as we do in C++. So it is argv of 0, that is at index 0. It stores the name of the script that we are running in Python, and then from the index value 1 onwards, it has the first command line argument, second, third, and so on. So in Python, there is one function that is len, that is len function, which calculates and returns the total number of elements, of your the variable that you're passing to it. So here we require, first of all, we require to check whether a user has entered 3 command line arguments or not. That's why, first of all, we have to check whether this condition is fulfilled or not. And for this, I will use a len function. So we will do here control construct, that is if control, that is if the len of sys.argv.
So Bharti, let me just interject here. So my question was, which of these statements can be done using the normal assignment conditionals that we know, and which requires knowing further, whatever you are talking about, the sys package and all that. So my question was, which of these we can write immediately saying that there's no problem, but for which of the other things do we need to know a little bit about? What you're saying is of course correct, but my question was slightly different. I was not asking how do you do this. I was asking which of these can be done easily by the usual things that we have learned, conditional statements and
so the first is the conditional statement. If part is conditional statement, where we have to just do the one checking provided we know the function. So if we are aware about the function, that we can simply put if control construct over there, and we can put the message that if it's not satisfied, just from this error message, right? And after that, we have to check the data type again. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So good. I think I think Bharti has told us the main part of it, that all the conditional statements I think we should be able to write if we knew what function to call, right? For example, I need to know I need to know how to find out the command line arguments. So if I knew how to find out the command, so the first statement probably requires knowing something beyond the what we have studied so far. But then once we know that, then the second statement is a simple if, saying that if that number is not 3, then you print something, right? And otherwise, which means else, then again we need to know how to find the first command line argument. Now that may be something that we don't know right now, but once we have the first command line argument, all we need to do is to check if it is something between 0 and 9. If so, then this, it's fine. Otherwise, print an error message, and so on and so forth, right? So it looks like that there are statements here which are, there are things that we are asking you to do, which you can already do, based on either C++ or Python, whatever you're comfortable with. Once you know how to find out the number of command line arguments, and once you know how to pick out each of the command line arguments from from the program. And so what this means is that given such a program, there's actually part of the program that you can write yourself, and then just knowing conditional statements and assignments. And there's perhaps another part of the program where you need to know what exactly functions, library functions to call, right? And so is there anybody else who wanted to comment on this? I mean, one way to sort of ensure participation is to randomly call out a name and then ask, what do you think about it? So since we had only Bharti who volunteered, maybe I'll randomly pick up some names. So maybe, I don't know, maybe Pankaj Durole, if you are there. Mr. Pankaj Durole, are you there? Okay, I'm not even sure if Mr. Pankaj Durole is listening. Okay, maybe Arati Fatke, are you there?
Yes, sir, but I'm slightly away from Mumbai and my network was bad. So could you please repeat?
Oh, no. So we were just discussing. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
So we were just discussing that if I were to write this program, uh,
Mm-hmm.
looks like there are some parts of it like simple conditional statements, and there are other parts for which I need to know some library functions to call.
Right.
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 So I wanted to ask you that, do you, I mean,
Which
Bharti,
part is not very...
or yeah, I mean, that Bharti has already mentioned. So do you know of these library functions which can give you the number of command line arguments or tell you which is,
Frankly, I don't know much of Python, so I don't know those
but in C++, would you be able to do that?
library function.
C++?
In C++, I would be able to do.
So
Yeah.
how do you do that in C++?
Yes, sir. In C, in command line, for command line arguments, I don't know, sir.
Okay, so that is fine. I think it's important.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mr. Kamlesh Patel has raised his hand. So yes.
Yes, sir. In C++, in the main function itself, there are two arguments can be specified, argc and argv, which are generally mentioned in all the books, but we can rename by any other argument name.
Correct.
So the first argument is
hear you. Hello.
Am I audible?
Yeah, now you're audible.
Yeah. So the first argument of the main functions will give you the number of arguments at the command line.
Correct. Good. So I think we've had some input, some responses. As you can see that we have not yet. I mean, I could have just gone ahead and presented the solution. I could have just said, okay, here is what we want to do, and then I already have. I already have program written for doing this, and I could say, okay, here is the program to do this. But that would just become one long monologue, and I'm sure attention of the students would be much less in that. So instead of that, what we do is we say part of it, then we ask, there's this reflection spot where we ask for inputs, ask the students to reflect, then we proceed to the next part, and then we proceed to the next part. So here is just my version of this program. So as Bharti rightly said, that we need to use the sys module, and then this is a function definition in Python where it can just print out whatever we want, and then sys.argv, I'm finding the length. If it is not equal to 4, I'm going to print this usage. Then I'm going to pick up each of those arguments and check whether it is between the desired ranges between 0 and 9, or it is yes or no, and whatever it is, right? So the point I'm trying to make here is that one could go ahead and say that, okay, here is what we want to do, here is a solution, do it yourself, and end of story. But that does not result in sufficient engagement with students. Their attention starts fading. And so the right thing to do, so once again, I'd like to go back to the that pedagogy class. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So that is what we mean by a learning dialogue. Okay, there is some content. In this case, I was generating the content live as I was, imparting this lecture. But you could pre-record it and put it. But then you have to put in these reflection spots so that it doesn't become one long thing. And it's not that the student doesn't have to do anything in between, right? Some little, maybe 8 to 10 minutes. Then you put in something, some activity that the student has to do. The student has to engage with it, maybe even submit it. And then the next part, and then again, so on and so forth, okay? And of course, learning by doing, I think this is also called activity-based learning, which is, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar. But the important thing to sort of note here is that you should not postpone practice problems and exercises to the end of the class. That becomes not very effective in online teaching. So you have to incorporate frequent practice in the form of maybe multiple choice questions. So the point is that your questions don't have to be super hard or have to be real brain teasers or nothing like that. This is, I mean, the main purpose of these questions is to keep the student engaged with the material that you are teaching. So, you know, you could have multiple choice questions that somebody who has just listened to the lecture should be immediately able to answer, but somebody who has not listened to the lecture will have to go back and hunt in the lecture, and in that process that student will actually end up learning. Okay, so the goal here is not to evaluate the analytical abilities of the student or how well the student is able to solve difficult problems in a short amount of time. The goal of these MCQs, short questions, the reflection spots, is to basically tell the student that if you are listening properly, it should be very easy for you to answer this, but if you're not listening properly, you can't proceed beyond this. Okay. So this is learning by doing. Learning extension trajectories. These are more advanced things where you can actually provide multiple trajectories. Just you can say that first do this and then do this and then do this activity, then see this video, or you could do this and that and see this video. So just making a whole bunch of things available is less effective than saying that, okay, take this resource, then do this and then do that, and then attempt this quiz. Or if you want to start, you can start from this resource, then do this activity, and then take that quiz, and so on. So there are multiple extension trajectories. Instead of just making the whole collection of it available, it is best to plan them out for the students as trajectories. So they can choose a trajectory and go ahead with it. It doesn't become too much overwhelming. And of course, learner experience interactions. These are discussion threads, discussion forums, where discussions can happen. These can happen completely in an asynchronous way. Somebody might post a question now, it gets answered by somebody else 2 hours later or the next day. But essentially, there is a discussion going on where the learners are interacting with each other and also with the teacher. And here is a kind of quick mapping of what we do in a face-to-face lecture versus what we have to do in online instruction. So in face-to-face lecture, we go to our class, give 40-minute, 1-hour lectures, whatever our lecture periods are. But here in online instruction, we have to split them into small chunks. We have to create a set of learner dialogues. Okay, so these are not just one-way monologues. In face-to-face, we have exercises and practice problems, which we often give at the end of a chapter. Here, we have to give them immediately after each LED. And remember, each LED is more like 8 to 10 minutes. Okay, and this could also be, the activity-based learning by doing. Resources and references. In a normal face-to-face interaction, we can just say, okay, here are things, you can go ahead and read them up if you want. But in online instruction, that is very, very ineffective. What you should do is you should sort of guide the student into using this resource after that and then doing that activity, and provide incentives, right? So essentially, maybe you can say, if you do this, then whatever, you get some credit, you get some marks, you qualify for something, and so on. And of course, discussions and interactions. So I'm going to sort of stop here today. I wanted to talk about the next thing, which is principles also, but since we are already approaching 4:30, we will take this up next time. But please go through this, all of you, the next time, so that we can quickly go over it next time. There's some very, very important instructions here that curate before you create. So it's basically saying there's a lot of good content that may already be available. Don't reinvent, but repurpose, curate it for your purpose. Okay, keep videos short, insert reflection spots, give practice immediately, frequently with feedback, incentivize access to diverse resources, peer learning. I'm sure all of us as teachers would understand that students not only learn from what we teach them in the class, a lot of learning actually happens through peer learning. One student teaches the other student that he or she understood something in a certain way, and then they have a discussion. So this peer learning, how do we enable in an online setting? So of course we can have discussion forums, but it is very important for the instructor to sort of steer that discussion. So you have to give focus questions. You have to make the students react to others' responses. This is the the thing group share, peer evaluation that we were talking about. Give simple quizzes. These are not necessarily meant to be, the most hardest brain teasers, but this is just meant to ensure the students stay engaged. And very, very important is when students are asking for something, when students are saying that, sir or madam, can you please let me know how I should do this? I'm stuck here. We have to respond to them in a timely and appropriate manner. This is easier said than done. I know all of us have a lot of other things, commitments also, but this actually goes a long, long way in ensuring that every student wants to feel that he or she is personally cared for in an online mode of instruction. And if a student posts something, and if the student doesn't get any response at all, or gets a response maybe after 2 weeks, that student sort of thinks that, oh, I'm just somebody in the crowd, I'm a faceless person in the crowd. But when the student gets a response maybe within a day or something, or even on the same day, the student knows that yes, the teacher is interacting with me, I do matter in this class, and it just exponentially multiplies the encouragement, the willingness of the student to engage further with the class. So with this, I will stop today. We will, with a request to all of you to actually go through this. In fact, we have just very sketchily covered up to this principles of online instruction. Next time, we do want to go, next time, which is tomorrow, we do want to go up to interacting with students. And if you click on these, there are further subtopics about these. Some of these may or may not be applicable in your setting, but I guess by and large, they're largely applicable. And regardless of the course, I mean, I illustrated a reflection spot using an example from programming, but you can do this in whatever subject you're teaching. In fact, the short lecture modules that are available, already available to you, which are the lecture modules prepared by Professor Phatak and me for teaching C++ programming, you could try to see what kind of reflection spots you want to introduce after those. In fact, this is what we would do every time we ask students to go through some recorded videos and then go to the class, and then we would say, okay, here are some simple questions for you to answer. And if you have seen the videos, then you should be able to answer these questions very easily. If you have not, then we know that you are having difficulties, and we know that you have not seen the videos. So you could go through those short videos that we have prepared and try to sort of figure out what kind of reflection questions you would like to put in between, so that there is a learner dialogue over there. Okay, so before we move on to the next part of the activity, which is discussing the grading, the assignment that was given to groups 1 and 2, and then to ask you to have a discussion in your own groups to create such a programming assignment. Before we get into that, if there are any questions, any comments, anything that you did not understand, maybe we can spend 5 minutes on that. You can raise your hand.
I would just like to intervene just to re-emphasize the point that Professor Pratik has made. The availability of reflection points in the recorded short videos is an extremely useful thing for effective online learning. As Professor Pratik was saying, in our case, we used to expect students to view these lecture videos at home and then come to the class primarily for discussion and problem solving session, which means we were using, when we taught this course, a flipped classroom. That is, you do your lecture viewing at home, but you come to the classroom for problem solving discussions and so on. Now that mode may not always be available for everybody. So if you have to run a part of your course purely online, then what he says, that is including reflection points in individual videos, insisting on some activity by students, is an amazingly effective tool. And I think that it would be a good exercise, although we did not think of it earlier, at least I did not think of it earlier, but this could very well have been an assignment for the C++ programmers at least. That is, choose a few video lectures which are recorded in the background material as per your choice. Go through them and point out at which minutes and seconds you would like to introduce an activity or a reflection point, and what should be the nature of reflection point. Even if you do it later on your own, you would probably understand that even in short videos, a reflection point insertion is a great way of enforcing the student's attention. Sorry for repeating this point, but both Supratik, I, and indeed many of our colleagues who actually have gone through the experiences have found out that the student's attention span genuinely improves when you do this. Sorry for interruption, Professor Pratik, but I thought I'll just add to whatever you said.
No, that's very useful. Thanks, Professor Patel. So yeah, there was I think Rashmi Patil had raised her hand, but she has lowered it subsequently. If you want to speak something, Rashmi Patil, you can speak out now. Actually, anybody else, I mean, we don't want this to be monologues. We want this to be dialogues. Yeah.
Sir, I'm Arti Fadke speaking from KJ Somaiya College.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask as well as share some about these reflection spots. Like if you're taking it in the class, of course we can have some time, or even now, just like sir you had done, we can spend some time in getting some opinions or reflections from the participants. But to get inputs from many of them, like I have tried giving Mentimeter polls or some kind of polls where they can write down a sentence, and that could be one way of getting their opinion so that we can have some discussion based on that. That was one. I mean, it's a good idea to spend a little time on these kind of things. What is your take on that? I just thought we can initiate this kind of a dialogue.
So what you're saying is that sometimes it's difficult to.
I'm just saying that. I'm just trying to say that opinions from many of them can be captured. Like, frankly speaking, something known as a minute paper, that they will write it on a chit and circulate, is also something which is practiced by some. But in case of online mode, maybe we can have some way of getting the opinions in the poll or in the chat kind of things. Can we do that? Will it be helpful?
Yeah. So what you're suggesting is doing this poll or chat or something. This is in a live synchronous mode, right? Because in an asynchronous.
Yes, sir.
mode, yeah. So this the learning dialogues that we talked about are for the asynchronous mode. Okay, these are pre-recorded videos that are there, but what we are saying is don't make the videos too long, make them short, but it is not just a sequence of short videos. There are these reflection spots interspersed in between, where in a video you have told the student something, and in the reflection spot you're seeking some inputs from the student, which could be as part of an assignment that the student submits, which could be as part of a comment that they post on a forum.
Yes, sir. What I was also mentioning is in asynchronous material also, we can insert some questions where they can write a sentence which will be their reflection.
Absolutely.
On that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that is the right thing. And the main point is that these are not super hard questions that we are inserting in between. These are just to make the student feel that he or she is progressing. They're able to answer a few questions and they can progress to the next module, and also to ensure that they stay engaged, right? This is a kind of positive feedback that we want to give to the student, that, oh, you're able to answer these 3 questions. Good. Now, you can go ahead and see the next 8-minute video or whatever. Okay? Excellent, Aarti. So is there somebody else? I guess Payal Bhattacharya. Yes, you have some comments. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, sir. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So actually, I have seen the the mail today itself in the evening that we were supposed to end up the assignment by 12 noon today, but due to some mishap at home and I was not well. I'm not well right now also. But we'll be able to do if we get just one day. In fact, just after the class also, we can finish the assignment. I can finish the assignment. I don't know about others, but I have not seen that. I didn't see that earlier, that by 12 noon we have to end up. And
so we will announce something on the group. I mean, to everybody. I mean, the whole purpose is for you to do the assignment. I know that several of you have, of course, you are also having health issues, but if there are genuine issues, just feel free to get in touch with us. We can always accommodate those. But by and large, we expect things to be done within the timelines prescribed, because otherwise it becomes very difficult to stay on track.
Yes. Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Thank you, sir. Sir, good afternoon. Sir, I want to add something. When we got a mail that you are given a group 2, so in that we should receive a mail that there is a graded assignment and the time deadline is by 12 noon. So we didn't know by the morning that we have received assignment and we were not able to trace that assignment, sir. By the time.
So, okay. So did you log into the IITBX?
Yeah, sir. We logged in twice yesterday also.
Then you should.
And we were not able to access the assignment. And by the time we were knowing that this assignment deadline is this one, so the time is already lapsed, sir.
Well, if you logged into the IITBX site, you should have been able to see the assignment. But once again, if some of you have, I mean, there are lots of people who have actually submitted. It is not that.
Yeah, sir.
Actually, there were 2 emails were sent out. One was informing that you belong to a particular group, and another one was a detailed email in which we mentioned about which groups are there, and the practice questions are released for Python along with the graded assignment, the deadline, and also the videos which were supposed to be watched before coming for this interactive session.
Sir, but we didn't receive the second mail, sir, detailed assignment.
It was at least
we are receiving some of the mails and we are skipping some of the mails.
So can you check whether it's going to your whatever other spam folder or something?
Sir, I'll check, but there was no mail. We were only given group 2 assignment.
No.
Group 2.
If you have received the first email, then you should have also received the second email, because it's gone through the same.
Sir, I'll just check.
May I intervene?
Yeah.
See, I will make one more suggestion. If Firoza could kindly post all these emails as plain PDF documents on the course page itself, saying that this is the mail which was sent on such and such date. Secondly, I would suggest to all our participants that you cannot depend only on receipt of email. At least twice or thrice a day, you must log into the home page, into the course page, and at least look at where the course is, what you are expected to do. So, for example, if as many others have already located this, perhaps this is the first time for several of you to use a MOOCs platform, and therefore the delay is understandable. I would suggest by picking up the thread of what Professor Supratik suggested, that for this once, as an exception, we may request Professor Supratik to consider extending the deadline of this assignment by, let us say, to 12 noon tomorrow. Professor Supratik, if you agree,
sure.
Instead of sending any email, we will post it on the or we can do both. We can send an email saying that this date is extended till tomorrow 12 noon, and also post it on the web page. Firoza, if you don't mind.
Sir, actually, now people would be able to see the answers, sir, because the deadline is over.
Oh, I see.
Yes,
so now the assignment has no. Okay, does not matter. What we may do is most probably by doing the remaining assignments, you would definitely qualify for a certificate, because this course is not a course which results in a grade like A, B, B, C, etc. for the normal students. This just whether you have done it or not done it. So I don't think it should matter. In case there is a situation which, because of this delay in submitting the assignment, is causing non-qualification marginally, then we may consider offering an additional makeup assignment separately. Am I okay?
Yeah. I think that's fine. Yes. So all those who have not been able to submit, as Professor Phatak said, there are other things coming up, and based on those we can evaluate you. But my sincere request to all of you is that solve it on your own. I mean, all of us are teachers.
Correct.
Even if it doesn't contribute to the evaluation towards the certificate, but just solve it on your own, because the whole purpose of this entire exercise is, I mean, we are not trying to test your skills
Correct.
solving problems. We are just trying to discuss how programming assignments should be set, how grading should be done, how we should engage with students. So sincere request is, even for those who missed it, please solve it on your own so that you can appreciate, what are the kinds of things that one needs to keep track of, one needs to be cognizant of when setting programming assignments. Okay?
Sir.
Go ahead.
Sir, I am not able to see any videos and assignments, sir, on my email. Nothing, no videos. I'm unable to see any videos or assignments.
Which group are
posted
you
in my email, sir?
Are you in group 1 or group 2?
Non-programming. Group non-programming.
Yeah, so non-programming, the assignment was there was no assignment in the last week for the non-programming group. The first assignment will be.
But I want to see the video. No, sir. Videos which you posted, Phatak sir said just now before first session, 2:30.
Yeah, I will tell you.
That video I am not able to see.
There are no new videos have been posted. I said I will post some additional videos on introduction to Python programming. But what I was saying was, there are already in the background material under topic 1, there are a series of lecture videos which are there. I had expected all participants of not just the group 3, but even other groups to peruse through those, because those are rather fundamental on how to introduce computer programming. Those videos are very much there as part of topic 1 of the background material. You should see them. What I said is that I will post additional videos pertaining to introducing Python programming for group 3 people. And as Professor Supratik has clarified, there is no assignment so far. I am happy that you are looking at the course regularly, which you continue to do. But what was expected is that you should see the videos of topic 1, which have been there always as the background material of the course. So don't worry about it.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
So, Supratik sir, that which you just now posted, just now you showed me the synchronized videos and all. So can I see an email that posted you, where you will post it and all, sir? How to see? Just now, synchronized videos you said just now taught us.
No, not synchronized videos. I showed you the web page for a course on online teaching that was prepared by our colleagues in educational technology. Are you talking about that?
Yes.
That has within it several videos, several slides. Yeah. So that, as I said, I showed the website. We will also put that website up. That is not a problem. We will give you the links to that website.
Posted on the course page.
Yeah.
However, please note that those are not videos which are incorporated as background material. That entire material is available on the ET website. And what Professor Supratik did was to show you the specific links to the videos that he was referring to during his lecture. There is much more material on the ET website. Those who are interested should look at all the details anyway.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
I think
So
you
quick-
go ahead with the next topic, Prashant.
Yeah, I just see two more hands raised, Kamal Kishore Sharma and Kanchan Mala. If you could quickly mention maybe, in 30 seconds what your concern is. then-
Yes, sir. Good evening. Sir, good evening. This is Kamal Kishore Sharma.
Yeah.
Sir, just wanted to know about the second assignment, which is supposed to be given by you. When we will get this second
You
assignment?
will receive an email about that. Okay.
Okay, sir. One more issue is one more question is like the peer assignments. So, sir, how do we get the names of our peers who are supposed to evaluate our
No,
peer?
you will not get names of your peers. When you submit an assignment, the peers will be randomly selected to whom your assignment will be forwarded automatically. Similarly, you will in turn get an assignment done by someone else for you to assess. But this will happen almost, without you knowing it. So there is, it is not a peer discussion. It is a peer assessment. So assessment to be done by peers. So don't worry about that. I think, Firuza, we should perhaps, maybe on Monday, we should set up a practice peer assessment problem so that they will all understand, except that it will mean more work for all of you. What we'll try and do, I'm just thinking loudly, we'll try and make a very simple assignment which everybody can understand, nothing to do with programming maybe, or something to do with, and just you have to write a short descriptive answer, and each one of you, when you submit it, it will automatically move to the peers who have been randomly selected in your group, and then you will be graded appropriately. So you don't have to worry about it. Maybe we'll throw in a practice peer assessment, just like you have practice problems already, so that you perhaps understand the peer assessment better. The only thing is I'm worried that it may slightly increase your workload, but it's worthwhile. So please look for such a sample peer assessment exercise. The difference between this sample and the other sample assessments that have been given is all other assessments you can do on your own, the sample assessments. But a peer assessment, even a sample, everybody in the group has to be involved. Otherwise, the assessment cannot be completed. That is the difference.
Good afternoon, sir. My question is, now the assignment will be available, the previous assignment?
The previous assignment has already been posted. It is already available. Only thing is, its submission will not have any weightage in the workshop for you individually. But the assignment should be available. You can definitely look at that assignment and do it on your own as Professor Supratik suggested.
Okay, sir. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So, excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Excuse me, sir. Non-programmers comes under group 3. They doesn't have any assignment, sir. Once again, please.
We did not have, so for group 3, there was no assignment until this week. But from this week onwards, there will be assignments. So you will get your assignment by email this week. So please keep watching the non-programming group also.
Yes, non-group group comes under group 2, sir. Then
group 3. Non-programming
group 3. Yes.
Group 3
comes under group 3. Yes. Group 3. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. So
hello,
I think.
Sir. Hello.
Yes.
Sir, actually, I solved 2 topics from the assignment. So is it completed by all the topics, sir? Does all the topics should be completed by the today 12 noon, or only 1 or 2 topics?
No, which one you are
from the first group, sir.
Yeah, you're in the first group, so you would have received a graded you would have received an assignment, right? A graded assignment.
I think he's talking about practice assignment.
So the practice assignments are for you to practice. Okay.
So graded assignment, I got 1 assignment that I completed.
Yes.
So only that one, sir. Even any other assignments are there?
So that one, yes, there has been only 1 so far, but now more will be coming. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Okay, sir.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I think in the interest of time, what we will do is, so it is good that we are having this discussion. I hope all of you are sort of appreciating that, an online, teaching, learning can only happen when, from both ends, we are trying to sort of be very active, always looking for what needs to be done when, and so on and so forth. And so it is good that several of you are asking questions. We hope that for most of you, things are already sorted out now. You know where the assignments are, you know where the materials are, and you are required to go and look at them. Okay. Now, to continue with today's program, what we had planned, and yeah, hopefully we'll be able to do a little bit of that, is, so there was a programming assignment that was given to groups 1 and groups 1 and 2. Group 3 did not have the programming assignment this time. We will have an assignment from next time onwards. The reason group 3 was spared is because we are conducting extra sessions for them to sort of teach some basic programming to them, and also the assessment we would like to do for them on things which are not so much centered around programming. So what I want all of you to do now in the remaining half an hour or 40 minutes that we have is the following. So we had given a programming assignment last time to groups 1 and 2 and not to group 3. And you would have seen that in that programming assignment, the problem was kind of broken up into parts, and you were required to sort of solve the various parts. You were required to, for groups 1 and 2, you were required to write some functions which did some specific, which were required to do some specific things. So what we want you to take back from this, and then over the next maybe 20 minutes, break up into your breakup rooms and discuss how you would do this in your own class, is that when you're designing a programming assignment problem, particularly in an online mode, but also when it's in a it's a regular face-to-face interaction mode, it is important to make sure that there is some structure in the way students are going to solve that problem, right? I mean, one could have given the same problem for those who have done the programming assignment. One could have given the same problem just as a textual description and said, write a program to solve this problem. Okay. Now, what would happen if you do that is that different students will come up with different ways of solving the problem, and assessing it, evaluating it would present a lot of issues. I mean, somebody is using some style of programming, somebody is breaking it up into a lot of modular functions, somebody is maybe doing it in a very monolithic way. So when we get this large heterogeneity of things in the way a solution is submitted, in the way students submit solutions, it presents logistical difficulties in fair evaluation, and it also presents difficulties in building up an infrastructure where maybe some of this programs can be auto-graded. Okay, because when you have large classes, you would probably, if you want to give several programming assignments, you perhaps would want to see if there is a way of automatically grading them, which could be just based on some test cases you're providing, and those test cases, are they coming out with the right answer, and so on and so forth. And then of course you inspect some aspects of the program, and so on and so forth. So if you notice the way the programming assignment was given, the way the programming assignment was structured, students were required to solve it in a particular way. You were required to write some function which did some specific functionality, did not solve the entire problem. Then another function which did some other functionality, did not solve the entire problem by itself. So you're required to design, program small modules which by themselves are kind of simple, and then you can put them together, you can string them together, stitch them together to solve the overall problem. And what we want you to do is in the next maybe 20 minutes. So Sushant, I don't know whether we have the breakout rooms arranged cohort wise or whether it's still random.
We'll have to create. So the host control is with you.
Okay, but I wouldn't know who's in which cohort.
No, it is not created.
Okay, okay. So so fine. I guess we would like you to break up into different rooms like what you did last time, and you know, for those of you who are all of you in that room are you know, doing programming. What I'm suggesting is that just like last time, let us make whatever 18 or 20 rooms, and put people randomly in those rooms,
right.
And then what we want them to discuss, you know, it is okay if some of them are from programming, some of them are non-programming, but I think the general principle we are talking about is that if you are required to solve if you're required to give a programming assignment to students for solving a particular problem, how would you like to break up the problem so that, you know, evaluation, you can do part evaluation, you can do a fairer evaluation, you can possibly you know, sort of help students identify which parts they made mistakes in, rather than just asking students to build one small thing. So this is, you know, sort of the merits of doing modular programming, the merits of doing things in a reusable way.
I agree that we should pick all the people. My only request will be that the non-programmers should not get you know, concerned about their not knowing programming. As Professor Supratik says, it is not so much to do with non-programming, but more to do with the collective thinking of how to set a particular type of question.
Correct.
So the non-programmers may merely listen to the discussion that goes on into that room. I tell you that you will all benefit from that, and let the programmers lead the discussion for the benefit of everybody.
Correct. And if there is a room with only non-programmers, I think feel free to come up with your way of breaking up the problem.
Correct.
Okay. So so Sushant, I've given you the host control. Maybe you can set up the breakout rooms.
Yes.
So, you know, as an example, so that we have some uniformity when we come back after 20 minutes to sort of check some of you know, some of the groups about what they have done. I mean, here is a kind of simple enough problem statement which you know, we would like you to see how it can be modularized, how it can be broken up into chunks that you can ask your students to solve, so that they can be put together to right. So what we want you to do is to create a programming assignment. Now, how you create the programming assignment is what you're going to do in the breakout room, how you're going to break it up into chunks, what you're going to ask students to do. So to create a programming assignment that at the end of it achieves the following. So it takes in two tables, okay, two tables of numbers, let us say marks, and it creates a third table which has sort of the sum of these two marks put together. Okay, so it should take in two tables. You know, we are not saying whether you do it in Python or C++ or whatever other your favorite language. That's not the important point here. The important point is what are the sub-problems you would like people to break these up into. So it should take in two tables of marks for the same class of students, and it should combine them into a third table where these marks are just added together. So now, you know, a few things that I would like to point out to you right away at the beginning is that these two tables are for marks for the same class of students. So you will have to put in some kind of, I mean, you'll have to ask students to put in some kind of error checking, because if I give you one table which has A, B, C, D as the students and another table which has E, F, G, H as the students, how do you combine them, right? So there has to be something which sort of makes sure that the input that is given, the two tables that are given are kind of legitimate tables which can be merged. You have to make sure that the marks that are given are legitimate things. The mark should be between 0 to 100, let us say. And you are free to come up with your way to ask students to break these up into small submodules. But we don't want you to just give one monolithic problem statement that you are given 2 tables, you have to merge them and make one table where their scores are added up. Because then, different students may come up with completely different solutions. So we want you to put a structure to how students are going to solve this problem, so that when we come back after, whatever, let's say 20 minutes, and when we discuss maybe 1 or 2 of your solutions, we can see how you have gone about addressing this problem. We should be able to have a structure to the problem that allows us to do part marking. Maybe some student has done some part of it correct, some part of it incorrect, so the resultant answer might be incorrect, but still some part can be correct. We can give them feedback knowing which part is correct. We can possibly even do auto grading, all of that. So is this clear? So the overall problem statement is taking 2 tables of marks, combining them together to add the marks with some error checking, right? And now you are free to break this up into sub problems that you ask your students to solve in whatever language. This is not language specific, so that at the end you can do a fair evaluation, you can do part marking, you can give proper feedback to students whose answers may not be matching, and perhaps you can also even do auto grading. Okay, so Sushant, if the breakout rooms can be enabled.
Yes, so there are only 155 people total, so I'll make 17 rooms.
Sure.
Okay. And assign automatically.
Yeah. And we will maybe come back at so it'll be 5:10 almost. So let's come back at 5:30, and we will definitely end by 5:40. We will take maybe 2 groups or 3 groups at most and ask them to present their solutions. We'll randomly choose them. So,
but all others will have to post ultimately whatever discussion happened there, the gist of it.
Right.
So they may not present today, but they must put it up later.
Correct. So the purpose of this exercise, once again, is for you to structure an assignment, a programming assignment that you want to give to your students, such that it doesn't become one monolithic thing, such that it enables giving feedback in a structured way. It enables you to give part marking in a structured way. It enables you to auto grade, and also it just sort of teaches students that modular programming is perhaps a good practice rather than monolithic programming.
Professor Supratik, I have already raised hand and I would like to ask a question, if you allow.
Yes, please go ahead.
Sir, as you said that we have 2 tables, then these two tables can have students which have different names. Means these 2 tables can have different students.
No. This is from the same class.
These are from the same class. Probably that these may be marks of two subjects, and one of the students might be absent in one subject, so his name wouldn't be in another table.
No, so then if the student who is absent, his marks is 0 in that subject.
Then the name of all the students will be same for both the tables.
So this is something that you should put in as part of your programming assignment, that there has to be a module which first checks that.
Yeah, right. And that's what I wanted to know, whether the student should check that these names are same or not, or should the code, their code should handle this problem.
No. You specify it. I'm sort of telling you part of the solution, but you break it up such that you are guiding the student in a way to write good code, structured code, and in the process you're also enabling you to do fair assessment, proper feedback, part marking, auto grading, all of that, right? So the whole
by the way,
that,
I would like to add to what Supratik said. You see the specific question that you ask, 10 more questions like this can be generated. In fact, one of the issues that we have seen is we give some test cases as sample test cases along with our programming assignments. However, when we evaluate or assess automatically, we add many additional test cases where we believe that the students, while writing the program, should have taken care of these as a part of thinking exercise while they write the program. because interpreting the problem statement in all its nuances is also a task that the student should accomplish. Of course, when additional test cases fail, the student is not to be punished to the same extent that the student is punished in terms of marks for the test cases which have been defined. That must be minimally done correctly. So what you are observing is a very important observation, but just as you have observed it, I believe I would expect most of my students to figure out, make some assumptions and state those assumptions and do things according. And the most logical assumption is what you stated, namely that the name of the student must be same in both the tables, but in the other table he should be given 0 marks if he has not appeared for that paper.
Actually, this is the case which I face in class, that students ask me to remove the ambiguity of the question, means what exactly they need to do or not. That's why I asked this.
My dear friend,
Yes,
you have come to an extremely important point in the entire teaching learning pedagogy. If we decide to ask completely unambiguous question, where is the role of any thought process by the student? In real life, all our students have to face 90% ambiguity, 10% clarity. That's a fact of life. On the other hand, much of our educational system insists on unambiguous questions. You will see all the maramari and arguments about question paper not being right, etc., is primarily because of the ambiguity. I can understand that things should be non-ambiguous in multiple choice answers, but long answers in general and programming in particular cannot have complete inambiguity about the problem statement. And in fact, if you ask me, the skill of a teacher is actually in designing a problem or articulating a problem in such a fashion that a slightly non-trivial ambiguity is implied in the question, where I expect student to think about it and resolve it. When I am handling the answers in person, then I can look at the English comments that the student has made, assumption that the student has made, etc. When I am auto-grading, that luxury is not available to us. And that is the reason there has to be some difference in the way the problems are stated in auto-graded assignments versus the questions that you would set when you actually grade the submissions yourselves. I'm sorry for taking a long time, Supratik, but I hope you agree that
Yeah, absolutely.
the thinking element has to be arose in the minds of students. Anyway, I already wasted 5 minutes, so the return time has just become 5:35. My sincere apologies. Let us go ahead quickly to breakout rooms.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello, this is Viresh.
Yeah, just 1 second. Sushant, if the breakout rooms are ready, you can enable them.
Yeah, I was just waiting because when I enable it, everybody will be left from this room. So nobody will be here.
Hello.
Yeah.
I have a small question, sir.
Yeah.
This is Viresh. Regarding assignment, can we see in a text form what is the assignment so that it will be clear for us to discuss in the room?
No. So in the text form, that is one thing.
As it is the last time we got.
Listen. So all I'm saying is that, today we are also running short of time. If you want slight changes in the problem statement, by all means go ahead and do that, but also note it down so that we know what programming assignment you're giving. So we have given you, so the point is this, Mr. Viresh, is that you as a teacher, you're trying to set a programming assignment for your students. Okay?
Yeah.
The general idea of this programming assignment is that the student should read 2 tables of marks for the same class and add them up along with some error checking.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Now, you as a teacher, you feel free to go ahead and, if you want to define further things in it, if you want to put further restrictions in it, go ahead and do that. But state that clearly in the problem statement that you are coming up with. Your group is going to come up with a problem statement, right?
Okay.
Your group is going to come up with a problem statement about how the students, what the student will see, what your student will see. So we want you to go through this exercise, that where the, you know, the generic overall programming assignment we want them to do is this. How would you present this to your students? How would you break it up and present it to your students? Okay.
Okay.
It is perfectly okay if 2 different breakout rooms come out with 2 slightly different programming assignments, which are solving 2 slightly different things. That is perfectly okay. All of these are legitimate programming assignments you can give to your students. What we want to see is how much of thought process you have put in into, you know, defining your problem and then breaking it up into the appropriate parts. Okay. Okay, Sushant, I think you can go ahead and enable this.
Yeah, I'm opening all the rooms.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm not sure if everybody has come back to the main room.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, can you speak a bit louder?
Sir, good evening, sir. This is Dayanati, sir.
Yeah, your voice is very, very faint. Very.
Sir, can I able to hear me?
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah, you go ahead.
I'm from group 14, sir.
Yes.
So can I show the question, sir?
Yeah, just wait a second. Yeah, so
okay.
we will, you know, I mean, so the point is we once again have overshot our time, you know, apologies for that, but we do not want to go very much past the time. So what we will do is, I think there were 17 groups and 1 group was not occupied. So there were probably a total of 16 groups. We expect each group to come up with a description of the problem breakup, how you would present it to your students for them to solve it, and sort of keep that document ready so that, you know, we can ask you to submit it. So you submit it when we ask you to submit it, and we can take a look at it. But right now, in the interest of time, what we will do is maybe we'll just ask 2 groups randomly, and 1 person from each group can just quickly explain, maybe in a couple of minutes or 2-3 minutes, how you are going to present the problem to your students and kind of why you are breaking it up that way. So, okay, I think group 14, you said that you wanted to say something, so maybe you can go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So from the group 14, we frame the question like this, sir. Just I read out the question, sir. Consider the student marks as, since from our group, we are combination of both C++ and from Python, sir, from group 1 and group 2. So by considering that, we frame the question. And the question is like that. Student marks are stored in any data structure. In the bracket, we mentioned as list or tuple or dictionary. If it is C++ means we give an option to use 2-dimensional array. So in that first column should be a register number. Second column is marks. And constraints for this data structure is register number should be in 3 digits and it should be unique. And the register number should not be null. And for the mark should be from 0 to 100, and all absentees are marked as -1. So by considering this scenario, write a program. Okay, I just make that, write a program. Either they can use C++ or Python. Write a program to sum the tables by exactly matching the register number, and the resultant table should be stored in the 3rd data structure. So like that we frame the question, sir.
Well, actually, I think you have missed the main point that I was trying to emphasize, which is that, you know, you should have, I mean, what we were asking you is to actually break up the problem into sub-problems. I mean, you have done a very good job of sort of explaining what should be there in the table and how absentees are stored and 3-digit registration number and all of that. But now just think about it, right? So suppose you give this problem to a class of, let us say, 50 students, and, you know, 1 student comes up with 1 monolithic program to do this. Okay, no functions, nothing inside it. Just the program perhaps works correctly. Another student comes up with another monolithic program, no functions, nothing, but then it doesn't work correctly. And now how do you know which part of it is not working correctly?
Okay.
And maybe a third student comes up with, breaks it up into nice functions, saying, okay, there is an error checking function which checks whether, numbers present here, are they also present there? There is another one which sort of reads the two things from the two things, updates it, adds it up and writes it in the third table. And then there's a third one which maybe prints out the table or something. So you will, as a teacher, you will, face some logistical difficulties in trying to do part marking for such students in a uniform and fair way. And it will also be difficult to auto grade, particularly for students who are writing this whole thing as a monolithic program. They might have made a small mistake somewhere and their answers are not going to match. Final answers are not going to match. Do you give them a 0, or how do you give them part marking? Right?
Maybe we can give the test case. Yeah. We can add the test cases. We forget to add the.
No, but with the test cases, you'll only get to know the input-output behavior, right?
Okay.
And the output is, let us say, not matching what your test case is. So does the student get a 0, or does the maybe the student just did not write, maybe in a particular loop they did not do something correctly, or maybe some error checking they did not do correctly, and therefore something bad is coming up. But do you want to, it's not fair to give a 0 to that student. And it's also difficult for you to kind of now figure out, you have to now plod through that student's code. And if it's written as a monolithic code without too many comments and all, it's going to be difficult for you to actually pinpoint.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yes.
So the whole idea was,
I agree.
So the whole idea was, so I'm glad that, you did this, and now we are discussing this so that you realize how it should have been done, right?
Okay.
So
yes.
So, Supratik, this is a very good point. In fact, I'm so happy about this discussion. So consider the following: whatever question you have formulated, suppose you also formulate the stages in the answers. So a stage, for example, for reading all the input data correctly. The second could be a function which will validate whether the values are okay or not in individual tables. Another function which will cross-correlate the entries in the table. And the third one which will calculate the third table, etc., etc. These stages will help in auto-grading tremendously, because you can auto-grade a particular function independently. Even if that function is wrong, we would have written a correct function to replace that. And the remaining part of the program can still be auto-graded correctly. Even when you are physically grading it, what Supratik says is absolutely correct, that going through a monolithic code. In fact, let me tell you an anecdote. It will take 2 minutes. I had a colleague in 70s, not a faculty member, fortunately a technical staff, but still a colleague who was participating in assessing the answer papers of our students. We were all doing it question by question, etc. Now he was sitting next to me in my table, and I could see him humping and thumping his head for 5 minutes. And then I just saw that he was writing 0 there. And he gave 0 mark to that student. And I said, have a heart. He has written 2 pages of code. Can't be all wrong. Phatak sahab, ye samajh mein nahi aa raha hai. Then I said, but you are giving him 0. Then he smiled and he says, he will naturally come back to me cribbing about 0 marks. When he comes, I will ask him to explain his code to me. And if he can explain, then I will give him some marks. If he can't explain. I then asked him, my dear friend, this is such a dangerous strategy. Suppose the student does not come at all. He says, that means he is convinced that his entire program is wrong. So 0 is justified. Now, one may be tempted to take such shortcuts when one has to go through long programs. And that is the reason why even otherwise, programming assignments are best broken into portions, as Professor Supratik. So let us not waste anybody's time anymore, but let us put it this way. Let us give participants, the moderators, one more opportunity. After all, they would have formulated the problem and many of them would have done this breakup. Please think about it once again. on behalf of the group of people with whom you discussed and come up with a strategy of partitioning as has been suggested by Supratik. Let us wait for one day and you can post these things tomorrow also. It's not a problem. Am I okay, Supratik?
Yeah. I think everybody should go through this exercise. This is a very...
And the other participants, I mean, there might be one moderator, but all other participants who have participated vigorously, there is no harm in, they are also going through a similar thing and coming up with the partitioning approach, because ultimately each one of us will have to individually handle a class of 50 or 100 students. So it is not that the moderator will be available to us during paper setting, etc., etc.
Correct.
So it is worthwhile for each one of us to do this kind of exercise in the context of the discussion that you had in that discussion room.
Correct. Okay, so good. I think in the interest of time, maybe we'll call this session, we'll end the session here. But what Professor Phatak suggested, this is a request to each group to do this, and also individual members of the group to contribute to doing this, that we would actually like to see the programming assignments that you have come up with. If needed, go ahead and modify it, go ahead and edit it further. But finally, we would like to see how you're presenting the problem to your students so that you put some structure in the way students go about solving this problem, and it also becomes more fair and more structured in the evaluation. Okay. And I think, with a little bit of practice, this is eminently possible. And this is, students also would realize the benefit of it. And, as Professor Phatak was mentioning, if there are 3-4 functions, and then maybe the answer is, maybe your test cases are not matching, but then, it may not be matching because of just one function. So if you know that everybody is going to break up the program in those 3-4 functions, because you have asked them to break it up as 3 functions, then you can even check whether which of these functions are working correctly. And you can give part marking. And you can tell the student that, look, you've done this part, up to this part you've done correctly, and this is the function where you went wrong. And each function is doing something, very specific, very modular. So with that, tomorrow, I guess we will devote some time again to going through this whole exercise again. We will keep some time for going through today's exercise in tomorrow's session. So please, everybody, do this so that we can, discuss this tomorrow. And hopefully, at the end of it, all of you will have a programming assignment statement, which is, which is kind of structured, modularized, helps both students and you as the teacher for evaluation. Okay, so with that, I guess we don't want to overshoot time every day, which unfortunately we have overshot again today. But hopefully the duration of overshot is decreasing with, we are learning. So okay, with that, we'll end today's session. Homework for you to do is to go through the online teaching pages that we mentioned. The 3 topics that I covered today, and then the next 3 topics which we're going to cover tomorrow. And of course, to go through the background material on teaching programming, which has already been put up there. And to also have this, programming assignment setting, question setting, what we discussed now, so that we can discuss this tomorrow. Okay, so we are leaving you with a bit of homework for you to do. Hopefully, all of you will be able to. I think this is, probably an hour or a couple of hours worth of time. A couple of hours should definitely suffice for this, to at least go through the part that we're going to discuss tomorrow. So we look forward to meeting all of you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you and good day.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, good. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you to everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you to everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.